Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolong Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolong is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, men go into the Nahanni Valley, but they don't come out. At least, not with their heads. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett. I'm joined, as always, by my phantasmagoric co-host, Alice.
Is that that's an amazing word. I feel, wow. I'm dumbfounded.
It means having a fantastic or deceptive appearance, or something in a dream or created by the imagination.
Which is what's awesome because people don't see me.
Oh, there you go. Exactly. So, see, it was appropriate and very sort of like Halloween-y for this pre-Halloween episode of the show.
Or do they see me? On one of the Get Vocals, didn't I tell everyone that my greatest fear sitting next to a window in a lighted room was that someone was standing right outside watching me, but I couldn't see them? There you go.
So good. So good. Yeah, it's like that episode of The Wire. It happened in The Wire.
I know.
Once,
it happens in real life.
Always come back to The Wire.
Always
does.
The Wire. We need to.
And I have a window right next to my recording, so somebody could be watching me outside of the window, even as we speak.
Maybe I'm watching.
Maybe you're watching me, Alice. Wow. It's got creepy all of a sudden.
I have to do something because all you ever do is scare me. I know that was just a teaser line about people coming out without their heads, but that's terrifying.
Hey, that is terrifying. That should be terrifying. Nobody wants to come out with that.
Where the heck did you hear about such a strange story?
I heard about this story from Mr. Ballin's YouTube channel, and if you're not listening or watching Mr. Ballin on YouTube, you are missing out. There's some amazing stuff on there, and when I saw him talk about the Headless Valley, I thought, well, we have to do this for Halloween. I mean, it's just obvious, right?
It's obvious.
It is obvious, and that's why we're doing it today for you guys. I hope everybody's excited about Halloween. It's right around the corner. Those of you who hate these Halloween episodes, they are almost over. This is the last one until next year. We'll be moving into cheerier things like Christmas. We'll have to find some Christmas murders or like Thanksgiving massacres or something. I don't know. Probably won't be able to find anything as interesting.
New Year,
as
new
Halloween,
murder.
But there you go. But I've enjoyed this, Alice. I've enjoyed October, and I hope everybody else has enjoyed it as well. And that's probably enough talk. Let's dive into this story. And we are back in Canada. It feels like we've been in Canada a lot lately. Hanging out with our friends north of the border. I hope you guys have been enjoying these stories. And this is about, none of you live where we're talking about now because nobody lives there. It's the Northwest Territories in Canada, one of the world's last great wildernesses. It is a land about the size of Mongolia, which is a big country. In fact, it's the 18th largest country in the world. But for all that space, all that land, there are only about 40,000 people who live in the Northwest Territory. It's the kind of place that has islands and valleys and caves and mountains that no one has ever seen or set foot on before, which in of itself is kind of creepy because when you think about the world today, you feel like everything's been explored, everything's been visited, but it hasn't been. There are still places of mystery and magic out there, and this is one of them. And in this almost uninhabited wilderness, there is a valley of sheer cliffs and beautiful vistas and a dark reputation, which is what brings us to it today. See, Alice, I would like to be able to visit all these places. I think it would be really great.
Have you spent much time in that area? I spent a little bit of time kind of in Banff and Alaska, and truly it is a place that I feel like you exist in nature and not the other way around, right? Most places in the United States or at least in, parts of settled civilization, it feels like we live in civilization and we kind of control things, right? We built the roads and we've kind of pushed out the animals and the what have you. But in the Northwest wilderness, it truly feels like you as a person are beholden to the great vastness of the topography and the wild animals who live out there.
I haven't spent much time. Well, I haven't spent any time up in that part of Canada or Alaska. I would love to do that one day. I would very much like to visit. And maybe I can eventually. Maybe one day, Alice, we can go on location and we can visit the Nahanni Valley and see if we come out with our heads. But in any event, let's move on a little bit. There's people who don't know about this story, and they want to know why people don't have their heads. The South Nahanni River carves its way through 200 miles of the Northwest Territories. It's marked by jagged cliffs thousands of feet high. If you're watching us on YouTube, you're seeing some of the photographs of this area and this almost otherworldly place. Waterfalls twice the height of Niagara Falls, and deep wilderness that seems to go on forever. It's the kind of place where the mists are thick and omnipresent, and in that wilderness lurks a darkness that has become legend. Parts of the valley have names like Hell's Gates Rapids, Funeral Range, and the Headless Valley, which I just got to say, if you're going to name something the Funeral Range or Hell's Gate Rapids or the Headless Valley, you really are telling people, don't come here. I mean, that should, it's like when we did Dyatlov Pass and we're talking about how the name of the mountain was Don't Go There. And it's like, just don't go there.
We warned
if the name
you.
Of the
What did
don't
you
go
expect?
there, don't
that
go
you'd
there.
come out with your head from the Headless Valley? No, you were warned.
I know. And of course, I'm one of those people who wants to go, right? Like, I want to go to Dyatlov Pass and I want to go to the Headless Valley. And it's this kind of place that even the indigenous tribes, the First Nations, they avoid this place, claiming that the woods are haunted by demons. And you might wonder, like we said, you're going to call these places these names. Nobody wants to go there. Why would anybody go to a place like this? But the answer is actually pretty simple. Gold. It has been said that the Nahanni Valley is a lost El Dorado, and that somewhere within it is a rich, lost gold mine of incalculable wealth.
And if we don't know anything from history, it's that people will die for kind of these treasure hunts. And so that's where our story takes us. In 1904, Frank, William, and Charlie McLeod set off for the heart of the Nahanni Valley in search of this gold. And they found it too. But on the return trip, their supply canoe overturned, dumping much of their find to the bottom of the river.
It had to suck, just on like massive levels, right? You found all this gold, you're going to be rich, everything's going to be awesome, and then your boat overturns. And it's not like you can like dive down to the bottom of the river and get the gold back. It's just gone.
And gold is heavy. Gold is heavy. It sinks.
Right, exactly.
That's why we can go pan for gold. It sits at the bottom. When they made it back to civilization, Charlie had enough. They got out alive, and that was it for him. But Frank and William had gold fever, and the next year, in 1905, they decided to go back in search of more gold. a man named Robert Weir joined them. You're going to tell me I said that wrong.
No, that's right. You nailed it.
A man named Robert Weir joined them, taking Charlie's place. Charlie wished them well and watched them head into the wilderness. Then he waited for them to return. And waited and waited. For 3 years, Charlie waited. And then he gathered a search party and headed out after them. For days, the search party trekked through the wilderness until they reached the Nahanni Valley.
And you might think 3 years is a long time to wait on somebody, but you got to remember back then, everything was harder and took more time. So travel took more time. Setting up their gold mine would have taken more time. Panning for gold. I mean, they're going out there for the long haul. They're going to actually set something up, not just go in, grab some gold, and hope the boat doesn't overturn. I mean, this is their plan. So at first, Charlie doesn't think anything of it. He just assumes, hey, they're out there doing their work. They must have found something great. This is awesome. Good luck to them. But 3 years, that with no word, all of a sudden it's become too long. He decides, I have to go find what happened to my brothers.
And, you have to say that Charlie really, he is essentially letting someone else take his place for wealth, right? And I can only imagine how difficult that first trip was and how dangerous that overturning supply canoe had been for him to say, you know what, it's not worth it for me. Not worth it for me to lose years of my life or my entire life to go back in pursuit of gold. Because that's what he's saying. He's saying no thank you to the gold. And he probably, at this point, thinks that they will come back with gold. They did it once, why wouldn't they do it again? Now the search party climbed into canoes and began making their way down the river to the place where the brothers had discovered gold before. Charlie figured if they were anywhere, they'd be there. The party would report the sense of dread and foreboding that fell over them as they entered the darkest part of the valley, where sheer stone cliffs rose so far into the sky as to block out the sun. The cliffs were riddled with black holes and caves, and the men felt certain that someone or something was watching them. They were relieved when their boats finally left that valley canyon. But unfortunately for them, their relief was short-lived, because there on the shore was an abandoned camp. What they saw there would soon become legend.
Alice, before we continue, I want to talk about what is probably my favorite sponsor that we have ever had on this show, Shudder. Alice, as you know, I love horror. I love horror movies. I love this time of year. I watch Shudder all the time. Those of you who follow us on Twitter, you've seen me tweet about movies I'm watching on Shudder, and I'm so excited to welcome them to the Prosecutors family. You guys feel the chill in the air. It's Halloween. It's the spooky season. And what better thing to do than to watch some scary movies? And there's no better place to do that than Shudder. They have kicked off their annual 61 Days of Halloween, a 2-month supersized celebration full of new movies and series, like a new season of the classic Creepshow and VHS 94. And one of my absolute favorites, Joe Bob Briggs, The Last Drive-In. Every single episode is awesome. Watch it.
And the great thing about Shudder is you can stream great thrillers, horror, and suspense for $5.99 a month or $56.99 a year. Shudder has the largest, fastest-growing curated selection of thrilling and dangerous entertainment. It's been called the Netflix for horror, and you can stream it on all your favorite devices. Your iPad, your phone, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, you name it, you can stream it. And you'll have unlimited access to stream ad-free on all your favorite devices. Shudder has a unique collection of exclusive and original films and series, horror classics, and blockbuster hits. It's basically Brett's dream. So, get started streaming the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content. Shudder's expertly curated collection includes must-see titles like Vicious Fun, The Mortuary Collection, and PG Psycho Gorman, plus all the best horror documentaries and the hit Creepshow TV series from executive producer Greg Nicotero of The Walking Dead. To try Shudder free for 30 days, go to shudder.com and use promo code TP. That's SHUDDER.com and use promo code TP.
Shopify is a platform built for growth, whether you're just starting out or already running a thriving business. From managing inventory to creating a seamless checkout experience, Shopify is designed to handle it all. And it doesn't stop there. Shopify helps you sell everywhere your customers are, online or in person. It's the ultimate tool for turning big dreams into big wins. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/OPP.
The brothers were there, all right, but they were not alive. Instead, the men found 2 skeletons. One of the brothers was outside of the 2 men's tents, laying on the ground, hand outstretched towards a rifle leaning against a tree. The other brother was still in the tent, blankets thrown across him as if the other brother had leapt up into action in the middle of the night. But it wasn't just that they were dead. Both men were missing their heads.
Yeah.
That's a lot to stumble onto. And
that is a lot to stumble onto.
We can talk about the medical side of things, but they didn't find decaying bodies. They found skeletons, so they have been dead for quite some time.
Yeah, whatever went down probably went down pretty soon after they got there. Or at least it wasn't recent, like you said. And we're going to talk about this more, but it's weird that their skeletons are there except for their head, right? Like, it'd be one thing if the skeletons were all sort of like dispersed about, kind of spread all over the camp, whatever, and when their head was missing, and maybe like a leg was missing too or whatever. I mean, then you might imagine all sorts of reasons that would be true. But the fact that it's just their head, and you have this image, and you can see it, right, of this outstretched skeletal hand reaching for the rifle just beyond its reach, as if in the last desperate moment he tried to get his rifle to defend himself, and then he died, right? And yeah, I mean, you can only imagine what poor Charlie must have felt like once he stumbled upon this scene. Because on the one hand, it's obviously tragic and terrible and heartbreaking, but on the other hand, it could have been him. Like, he could have been with them if he had decided to join the party.
And one thing to note, we've talked about a lot of wild animals and beasts living out here. It's very common that if you were to die out in the wild animals would scatter your bones. But usually they are the smaller bones that are easy to move. Your skull is one of the heaviest bones because, as you can imagine what it looks like, it doesn't break apart. Your skull is usually, except for the mandible, one piece. And so it's very hard to drag a skull away. So oftentimes when you see scattered bones from, wildlife, it's what Brett said, fingers or, a leg bone, an arm bone, a rib maybe that's been broken off, but not usually the skull.
There's not a whole lot of meat on the skull, Like, if I'm an animal and I'm looking for something to eat, the skull's probably not what I'm going for. I mean, maybe I'd like eat the nose and the eyes or something, but other than that, there's just not a whole lot there. Certainly not enough to like drag it off somewhere to gnaw on or whatever.
We've talked about 2 skeletons. What about the third man on the trip? Neither Robert Weir nor any gold was found, despite a carving in a nearby tree indicating that the brothers had found some. But just a little bit down the river, another partial skeleton was found, and most people believe it belonged to Robert Weir. No one could figure out who or what killed the men, but the police settled on the idea that the men starved to death and that their heads were simply taken by wolves. This satisfied no one, as the brothers were outdoorsmen who lived on the land most of the time. It simply made no sense that they would not be able to survive in this lush wilderness. Whatever the case, the area earned a new name, the Headless Valley.
The whole starve to death thing is absurd. Can we just go ahead and put that out there?
You can't starve to death with your hand outstretched to the rifle. I mean,
right,
that's clearly not what happened.
Like he was desperately reaching for the rifle to shoot the deer that had walked up as they're starving to death. But it was his last bit of energy, and so he lost it. Yeah, I mean, these are guys who live out in the wilderness. There's two of them also. I mean, it's one thing for one guy to starve to death when he's all by himself because maybe he hurts himself and he can't hunt anymore, gather anymore. But you got two guys. One of them dies in their bed. The other one, like you said, dies reaching for a gun. And you're going to say, oh, they probably just starved to death. Okay.
Right. I mean, the one brother underneath the covers just screams of a sudden death. Right. It wasn't cold. They didn't freeze to death. This is not the Outlaw Pass. So it's as if he were stunned to death in his sleeping quarters.
And I don't want to forget the fact that there was no gold there, which, we're doing Halloween stuff, but this is still a true crime podcast. And as Alice said, nothing drives people to both good and ill like gold. And you can imagine if these two guys found a bunch of gold, maybe somebody got jealous and decided to do something about it. There's this marking on the tree that says they found a good stake, and, that was sort of their claiming that stake, and yet there's no gold. And it's kind of hard to imagine how that's possible. Like, how could there be no gold if they're claiming they found a good stake, especially if they just starved to death? They didn't eat the gold, right? So where's the gold? And we'll talk about that more later. And this was not the final, by any stretch of the imagination, final tragedy to occur in the Nahanni Valley, or the final tragedy to help burnish its already dark reputation. Let's talk about Martin Jorgensen. This is in 1917. So what happened to the brothers kind of scared people off for a little while. This story became a big story in Canada, particularly in Western Canada. This whole Headless Valley thing, very evocative. Sells a lot of newspapers. And there weren't a whole lot of people going in there anyway, but I think after that it sort of slowed down even more. But Martin Jorgensen, I mean, look, there's still gold there, right? And he decided he was going to try his hand in the Headless Valley, and he was no novice. This was not somebody who didn't know what they were doing. In fact, he was known as an expert prospector, and he had cut his teeth in the Yukon during the Yukon gold rush before. By all accounts, things were working out great for Jorgensen in the beginning. In fact, he reached the Nahanni Valley, he established his camp, he didn't have any trouble. And after a few weeks, he sent a message to his partner that he had, quote, struck it rich, which was, very intriguing for that partner. And so the person he sent the message to, along with a couple other people, decided to head out to meet up with Martin and see this find that he had made. But when they arrived at the site of his camp, they found a cabin, but it had burned to the ground, and just outside of it was the skeleton of Martin Jorgensen. Now, Martin had said that he struck it rich, which means you would expect to find a lot of gold in the area, but you didn't find gold, and you didn't find Martin Jorgensen's head.
Not another one.
Yeah, and so now at this point, you got people thinking they're like, what's going on in the Nahanni Valley? Where are these heads going? I mean, the police, once again, say this is an accident. The cabin burned down. Who knows why? Martin died. Wolves came and got his head again. These animals in the Nahanni Valley, they love the head. The eyeballs are delicacies or something. I don't know what's going on with these animals, but all they want to eat is the head or something. And, of course, nobody believes that, and everybody's talking about, are there some sort of strange creature in the woods? Are there headhunters in the woods that we don't know about? What sort of craziness is going on here? And it just continued. There continued to be more and more stories of things happening in the Nahanni Valley. And this next one is the one that I think, this is great. This one gets to me. Anyways, so it was 1926, and it was a dark night in 1926. And there was a local Native American man known as Big Charlie who had gone into the Nahanni Valley, and he had set up camp on the Nahanni River. It was very late in the evening when he awoke to the sound of rocks splashing into the river. And you can just imagine he's laying there in the dark on a dark, moonless night. And he hears this sound outside of his tent. And I mean, look, Big Charlie had heard all the stories everybody else had heard, right? I mean, he knew all the craziness about the Nahanni Valley. And you got to think, he's thinking, what in the world is that? Right? Like, what is knocking rocks into the river or throwing rocks into the river in the middle of the night? And so he decides he is going to take a look, which is a little bit more brave than me. I would have just grabbed my rifle and like sat there in my tent waiting to see if anything came inside. But he's braver than that, and he's curious, and he wants to see what in the world is making this noise that he's hearing. So he sort of cautiously creeps to the front of the tent, doesn't want to alert whatever's out there to his presence or that he knows that they're out there. So he sort of cautiously unties the flaps of the tent and peeks out. And what he saw absolutely stunned him. He could not believe it. And it wasn't anything that you're expecting. And it wasn't anything that Big Charlie was expecting either. In fact, there was a white woman outside his tent on all fours, only a few yards away from him, and she was scrambling sort of clumsily up a rocky hillside, crawling up this hillside. And as she's doing that, she's knocking the rocks of the hillside down into the stream and making the splashing sound. She's struggling to get up this hill, and she can't make it up there. And the thing that blew Big Charlie's mind was she was completely nude. So you have this completely nude woman in the middle of the night, on all fours like an animal, scrambling up this hill. And he's thinking, I gotta help this girl. I don't know what's going on here. This is the craziest thing I've ever seen, but I gotta help this girl. I gotta go do something. That's what he's thinking, right? But just as he started to leave the tent, at first he was being careful. He was being cautious. He wasn't making any noise. He didn't want the girl or didn't want whatever was out there to see him. But now, he's going to help. So he's making noise. He's getting out of the tent, and she hears him. And when she hears him, she looks in his direction, and they lock eyes, and Charlie falls back into his tent, scrambles back into his tent. He would later say that what he saw in those eyes was not human. He said, quote, "It looked like a devil had got her. He did not follow her, and she was never seen again."
And remember, this guy's nickname is Big Charlie. He's probably not easily frightened. He's out here in the Nahanni Valley by himself after all of the lore of the Headless men who had been killed. And he stumbles backwards, really kind of, I can only imagine how frightened he is by a woman who's probably a fraction of his size. But it's not her size or what she's doing that scares him, but the look in her eyes. And it's so strange. Who would be out there? It's not easy to get out here, right? You go on these expeditions to reach the Nahanni River. So it's unlikely that you would find someone who's able to make this trek naked with no provisions, with no weapons out there. Which, I don't know, Brett, leads me to believe that she lives out there.
No, it's unclear exactly what's going on. Eventually, we'll learn, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, that she had been out there with another group of people, and she had sort of disappeared from this group, and they didn't know where she'd gone. And they learned this story from Big Charlie when they ran into him. Big Charlie, he immediately left. He went back to civilization, and he went to the first bar he saw, which is exactly what I would have done. And while he was in the bar, this party shows up as well. And they start telling the story about how, this girl has disappeared, has vanished. And he hears them, and he realizes it's the same girl. So she apparently she knew the area. This was very strange. I mean, this was not something you would expect from her to be doing. So whatever happened, whatever came upon her was as sudden as it was surprising.
And that is not the last of the Nahanni Valley lore. In 1927, Yukon Fisher was an outlaw who was often seen in the Nahanni Valley. Now, his full name we don't actually know, but he got his nickname from his time in the Yukon gold fields. He'd often show up at local trading stations with gold nuggets that he would trade for shotgun shells and supplies. Then, he suddenly wasn't there anymore. And people noticed this. Now, his body would be found not very far from where the McLeod brothers were found 20 years before. And no one could ever tell what had happened to him.
Yeah, and, this is another tough guy, right? I mean, this is these are not inexperienced people going out there. This reminds me of Dyatlov Pass in a lot of ways. We talked about Dyatlov Pass, and we talked about how one of the theories is, they don't know what they're doing, or they're just a bunch of tourists, or they're a bunch of college students, and not surprising that tragedy befell them because they were way out of their element. And that wasn't true. They actually were very experienced. They knew exactly what they were doing. If anybody could do it, they could have been able to do it. And that's what you're seeing from these people. These people, they know what they're doing. They've been in harsh conditions before. The Yukon Gold Rush was tough. That was a rough place. You didn't go there and have any success or even survive without being somebody who was both lucky and good. And those are the kind of people who are now going to the Nahanni Valley. They're bringing their experience. They should be able to do this and survive. And yet, again and again and again, you see these people who are dying and disappearing. And maybe it's not that surprising that there are people who are dying in the Nahanni Valley. It is a dangerous place. And we're telling you the ones who died. We're not telling you all the ones who went in and came out and it was fine. Right? So it's not so much that people are dying. You would expect that. It's how they're dying. It's the circumstances of their death. It's what people are finding when they find their bodies. That's the thing that's sort of driving this legend and driving this lore that surrounds the Nahanni Valley.
I don't know how the law enforcement are explaining this away now. It's kind of like wolves one time, wolves a second time, wolves a third and fourth time.
Lots of wolves.
It's just, it's so bizarre. And, it doesn't stop there. 14 years after Jorgensen's death, another experienced prospector, Phil Powers, by the way, that's a power name, went into the Nahanni Valley in search of riches like so many before him. Months later, Royal Canadian Mounted Police would come upon the remains of Powers' cabin. Like Jorgensen, it was burned to the ground, but with Powers inside. Locals could not understand why Powers would not have escaped from his cabin when the fire began. It appeared that this fire spread from the roof, and Powers should have been able to easily flee. So some speculated that whatever was outside his cabin was more frightening than the prospect of staying inside with the fire.
That's super creepy, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's human nature to get away from the fire.
Exactly. Unless whatever's outside is scarier. And I don't know. Once again, you got another burned down cabin. You're starting to see similarities. So the similarities you're seeing, missing heads, burned down cabins, people who should know what they're doing, nevertheless, die in these mysterious circumstances. And you're seeing it again and again and again. And you have to wonder what is going on in the Nahanni Valley. And I think the natural question to ask, particularly on this pre-Halloween episode, is the land cursed? Is the Nahanni Valley in some way cursed? And with so many people disappearing and so many people dying, it's natural to wonder. Or does something wonk in those woods that we just don't understand? Something that's beyond our understanding, that's in the wilderness, that civilization can't touch. In 1946, during one of the many searches for a missing person in the valley. So here we're in 1946. So 15 years after Phil Powers died, we still got people disappearing. It was led by a man named Frank Henderson, who was an explorer who was searching the valley for his missing partner. He and his partner had decided, like so many others, they were going to go into the gold game, and his partner was supposed to report back, and he had vanished. And so Henderson, who knew the valley well, put together this search party, and they're all huddled around a fire. It's relatively late at night, and as they sat around that fire, suddenly a party of Native American men emerged from the darkness, and they had a warning for Henderson and his friends. They said, Don't leave the light of this fire, for there are what they called white figures lurking in the forest. Safe to say, the men did not sleep that night, and the next morning they decided the search was over and they returned to civilization. And when Henderson got there, he said, quote, "There is absolutely no denying the sinister atmosphere of that whole valley. The weird, continual wailing of the wind is something I won't soon forget."
I am creeped out just hearing all of this. Like that, this is not an act. I really am freaked out right now, Brett.
And the wailing of the wind, is there anything more disturbing than the wailing of the wind? I feel like that is one of those things that just kind of gets into your bones and makes you scared when you hear it. I don't know exactly why. I don't know if it's what it portends or what it conceals. I'm not sure, but it's definitely one of those things. You can imagine exactly what he's talking about. There's something primal about it. There's some primal fear that Henderson has put his finger on. And I recently learned of a term called the landscape of fear. And it's this idea that when a predator is going through an area, that the prey, they all recognize it. They know it's there. And so some prey who are near the predator will see it, or they'll hear it, or they'll smell it, and they freak out. And, they start making noise, or they start having pheromones that, react because of the fear. And all of the other prey, sort of in concentric circles, start to experience the same thing, even though they may not necessarily be near the predator, and they feel it. They don't know why they feel it, but they have this message that there is something dangerous there, and they call that the landscape of fear. And I feel like that's kind of what these men are experiencing. They don't see it, they don't hear it, but they know there's something in that forest that's dangerous. And I think it's possible that the wailing of the wind may give us a clue to what is haunting that valley. And it's a creature of legend, particularly in Canada, called the Wendigo. Now, the Wendigo has a lot of different legends about it. Some of the legends say that it moves, the speed of the wind, that it sort of is the lord of the forest, that it haunts the forest. Some people say that it corrupts the souls of those who are greedy or desperate for wealth, which fits perfectly here. And according to the Algonquin people, the Wendigo can even turn men into cannibalistic murderers. In fact, there is a condition called Wendigo psychosis, which describes patients who suddenly feel possessed by cannibalistic desires. Wendigo is a very interesting thing. If you're interested in it, I would recommend a book called The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood. It's actually a short story, so it's an easy read, and it is about a party of hunters who go into the forest and are beset by a Wendigo. So very interesting. Totally check it out. Great read for Halloween, and who knows? Maybe it's a Wendigo that's haunting the Nahanni Valley.
Yeah, the Wendigo psychosis in and of itself, I feel like we could have an entire episode on.
Oh, yeah.
That is, woo, you've really just teased it right there.
I know. And there are people, who claim to be Wendigos who committed sort of cannibalistic murders and said they were possessed by Wendigos. I mean, it's a thing. I mean, it's, I don't know that you see it anymore, but it's certainly something that in the early 20th century people talked about.
Before we move on, I have to stop and talk about one of our favorite sponsors, Felix Gray. You guys have heard me talk about blue light glasses that started it all. Well, 5 years ago, Felix Gray realized that our eyes just weren't meant to look at screens all day. And they set out to create eyewear that would improve daily screen time. Since then, Felix Gray has been on a mission to create a better relationship with technology. And Felix Gray lenses filter 15 times more of the most important blue light that causes things like headaches, dry eyes. I know from staring at a computer screen all day as a lawyer, I definitely get sore necks and kind of an inability to focus until I got my Felix Gray glasses. I got the Roebling Sazerac crystal glasses that look so chic and so professional. The best part, it filters out that blue light that causes my headaches. Now, whether you're heading back to the office, back to school, or back to whatever, you can count on Felix Gray. Visit felixgrayglasses.com/TP. They're available in prescription and non-prescription. So check them out now. felixgrayglasses.com/TP. That's FELIXGRAY glasses.com/TP. It's free shipping, free returns, free exchanges. felixgrayglasses.com/TP.
So, we've reached the point in the podcast where you could just turn it off if you want to. If you really like the story of the Headless Valley and you're like, man, what a great legend. That's so awesome. You should just stop here. And we'll see you
just
guys
stop.
next week.
We'll wait quietly while you turn this off. We're not going to ruin
give you 5
it
seconds.
for you.
Right, exactly. But for those of you who remain, we're going to give you the reality behind the legend. So, might be a Wendigo, but probably not a Wendigo.
Well, like Brett said, the legend of Headless Valley is just incredible. And I think many podcasts and many people would just leave it there. It's a great Halloween story. Let's just stop. Those deaths are all real. We didn't make those up. And it is creepy enough in and of itself. But you guys know that's not our way. We've been called cold water prosecutors. We don't like to sensationalize things. We want to know what's actually happening. So let's talk about the truth behind some of these legends. First, Frank and William absolutely ended up dead on the bank of the river. But they weren't decapitated. In fact, it was their hair that helped to identify them. And their cause of death actually is not a mystery. They were shot. No gold was found, and neither was Weir, nor was his skeleton found down the river. So it's really likely, I think you are already beginning to see the story unfold of what actually happened. It's probably likely that at some point, Weir got greedy, he killed the 2 men, and ran off with all the gold that they had found.
Yeah. I mean, now, you may be asking yourself, well, where'd this whole Headless thing come from? And we're gonna see where that came from in a second. No, another thing, the brothers, nobody was reaching for a rifle. They actually were both found in their tent, in their beds. So what happened here is whoever shot them came up on them in the night, shot them, and then stole whatever gold was found. So pretty straightforward murder is what it seems like in this case.
Right. And you're thinking, well, there's so many other suspicious deaths. Let's talk about those as well. Because the story of Martin Jorgensen is actually very similar to the brothers. Jorgensen had also been shot. His head was indeed missing. But given the cause of death, it's likely that this was a case of animals dispersing the body. Nearly 30 years later, Frank Henderson stumbled upon 30 ounces of unrefined gold stashed away near Jorgensen's cabin. It's likely that this was part of Jorgensen's find, hidden so well that his killer didn't discover it.
And I think Jorgensen is the genesis for all this, right? I think they found Jorgensen and he didn't have a head. And yes, he'd been shot, but the head part captivated somebody. And you guys, you remember when we talked about the lighthouse keepers all the way back in like episode 3 or 4, and how there was that one newspaper that took sort of the kernel of truth from the lighthouse keepers and then turned it into this big legend? I think the same thing was going on here. I think you had Henderson, who'd been shot, his head was missing, probably was dispersed by some animal. And I don't think it was just his head. I think there were other parts of him missing too. And then they sort of went back to that McLeod story and had them missing their head. And rather than being shot in their bed, you make up this whole thing about them reaching for the gun and how the police seem like they're covering things up, because police cover-ups have always been popular. Doesn't matter what it was. And you're sort of building this narrative. The vast majority of people who'd be reading your story have never been to the Nahanni Valley. They never heard of the Nahanni Valley. They're never going to talk to anybody in the Nahanni Valley. So they just believe, wow, the Nahanni Valley, it's crazy. There's all these headless people going on. And the story just continues to grow, and it builds on itself. And then you end up with this fantastic legend that we have now. And it doesn't stop there. The fate that befell Jorgensen likely also befell Powers. Remember, we talked about him. He also had the burned down cabin. Now, the fire had been so hot that it destroyed most of Powers' remains, and no cause of death could be determined. The RCMP speculated that Powers had been negligent in building his cabin and had left the stovepipe exhaust too close to the timbers, causing the fire. So you remember, the fire started on the roof, so he screws up the cabin construction, it lights the roof on fire, and he dies. Now, those who knew better scoffed at this theory. First, Powers was no fool. He'd built many of these cabins. He built them all the time. Not leaving sufficient room for the exhaust pipe was the ultimate rookie mistake. It's not the kind of thing that somebody like Powers would do. Second, such a fire would take a very long time to catch and spread. This is not, would not just immediately ignite and then you're, 2 minutes later, you're dead. This is not the era of synthetic materials that burn very quickly. This would have taken some time. He likely would have woken up. He likely would have been able to escape. Third, Powers' supply catch was untouched, save in one exceedingly peculiar way. The gasoline cans he used to store fuel for his boat were bone dry. And finally, one of the cabin windows was shattered in such a way, indicating that it had been shot out. So what people tend to believe happened, not the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, but what other people think happened, is someone shot him through the window, stole whatever he had found, used the gasoline to burn the cabin down around him to cover up the evidence of that crime. Then there's the young lady who was scrambling up the mountainside. We know her name. Her name was Annie Lefert. Someone will correct me on that pronunciation. When we did Karina Petrochet, we mispronounced her name. And I think it's Petrochet. I don't know. Somebody told us we mispronounced it, but they didn't tell us how we mispronounced it. So, sorry, Canadians, but I don't know how to pronounce your names. Anyways, Annie Lefert, or Leferte. That was her name. She had gone on a camping trip with some of her relatives. She apparently had a history of mental issues and was known to do bizarre things. So what probably happened was, in the middle of the night, she had some sort of mental break or psychotic episode. She strips off her clothes. She runs into the forest. Poor Big Charlie sees her, and he doesn't recognize it as mental illness. He thinks she's been possessed by a devil, and that's what he sees. And then she unfortunately meets her death there in the wilderness, not wearing any clothes at night. She would not have survived very long, and it's not surprising at that time that they never found her body. So those great mysteries maybe are not as mysterious after all.
Now, you may be thinking, well, so how did all of this turn into the lore that we now know? If you read some of the old publications about the Nahanni Valley, you'll run across references to the, quote, first white man to explore the area, Poole Field. Although it may seem like everyone who went into the Nahanni Valley died or disappeared, that wasn't true of Field. In fact, you can find abandoned cabins built by Field all over the valley even to this day, and Field lived in the valley. He made his living running a trading post to service all those prospectors who made their way into the valley looking for gold. And in every case we mentioned, Field keeps showing up. The McLeod brothers almost certainly visited Field at his trading post on their way into the valley. In fact, it was Field's partner, Jack Steiner, who found the brothers' original stake.
Yeah, Field, it's interesting. Field's just going to keep coming up again and again. And we started this story with the McLeod brothers in the early 1900s. And Field, he had gotten to this area at about that time. At one point, he had been a constable. He's a very interesting guy. And, we just talked about how, so it's Jack Steiner, it's a partner of Field's, who sort of stumbles upon the brothers' original stake. So he finds where they had been digging out the gold. He finds some of the gold. Pretty convenient that he just so happens to be able to find that when others weren't able. What makes you wonder, like, how did he know where it was? You remember Martin Jorgensen? We talked about his partner, how he sent a message to his partner that he had struck it rich. Who was that partner? Poole Field. Poole Field was the person who he said he told struck it rich, and Poole Field was the person who went out to find Martin Jorgensen. We talked about Yukon Fisher, the man who would buy supplies with gold nuggets that he'd found in the valley. Where do you think he was buying those supplies? Who do you think he was giving those gold nuggets to? In fact, he was shopping at the trading post we just talked about, the one owned by Poole Field. And even Annie Leferte was Poole Field's niece. So Poole Field is connected to all these people who disappeared, all these people who died, all these people who mysterious circumstances befell them. There is one thing that ties all of them together, and it's not the Nahanni Valley, it's Poole Field. Now look, not saying Poole Field had anything to do with it, because if we said that, everybody in Canada would be mad at us. Poole Field, he's an interesting historical figure. He's something of a hero in Canada. He was actually a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He was commissioned in 1898. His letters are treasured to this day for their anthropological value. In the study of the First Nations people in the area, he wrote a lot about them. He wrote a lot about their traditions and their language and their culture. Lots of great contributions. And, it's likely that he had nothing to do with the deaths in the valley, but his connections to them certainly raise an eyebrow. And, the last story we told you was this story about how in 1946 you have a search for another missing person who went missing because they were in the valley looking for gold. That was 1946. Poole Field died in 1948. And after his death, all the stories in the Nahanni Valley, they kind of die away too. You stop hearing about people disappearing. Stop hearing about all these strange things. Now, there are lots of things that could account for that. It's 1948. It's the post-war era. Some of the magic of the past is fading away. It's like the modern world, and, it's just not as cool anymore, right? I mean, just cool things aren't happening as much. Number two, the Nahanni Valley is designated as a cultural wonder of Canada. It's protected. It's a national park now, so you can't really do as much of the mining as you could do before. So even fewer people are going in there. Those are probably the reasons that these stories die away. But it's interesting that it also happens to coincide with Poole Field's death. And if you go to the cemetery where Poole Field is buried, his tombstone reads, Lord of Nahanni.
The Lord gives and the Lord takes.
Yeah, it sure does.
Not saying he had anything to do with these. I'm just saying. There could be a lot more to that name.
Like, he and Jessica Fletcher connected to a whole lot of deaths. It makes you wonder. It just makes you wonder. I'm just saying. So, anyway. Well, that's the Nahanni Valley. That's the Headless Valley. Alice, are you ready to go on an expedition there to see if we can discover the truth behind the Nahanni Valley, what was really going on? I think that should be our next. We can do a live podcast from there. A live Get Vocal from the heart of the Nahanni Valley.
Yeah, you go first. I'll meet you there.
That's what they always say. And the first guy always disappears.
Someone on our Twitter, after we released the Lizzie Borden, wanted to go start a GoFundMe to send me to stay a night in the Lizzie Borden home.
I saw that. I support that fully.
Man, they know what would completely freak me out. So no, I'm not going to the Nahanni Valley, but I will look at all the pictures you take when you go.
Well, we're interested to hear from you guys, particularly you guys in Canada who are familiar with the Nahanni Valley, to hear what you think about the legends and the mysteries there. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com. As Alice just mentioned, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook when it's up. We're on Instagram @prosecutorspod. Hello to all of you on Patreon. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Hello to those of you who are watching this on YouTube. We'll put up some sources where you can read more about the Nahanni Valley. It's interesting. You know, there's one source that tells you the legend, and then there's one source that tells you the truth. And it's always kind of fun to compare them and see how they go. But we'll put those up, and we'll also link to the Mr. Ballin video. Mr. Ballin does a great job of telling this and all other stories. I mean, he is just super creepy. I don't know what it is about him, because he's not a creepy guy. You know, it's not like he's not surrounded by candles or in a dark lit room or anything. There's just something about the way he tells stories that are really creepy. And I went on a Mr. Ballin binge at one point. I just fell down the rabbit hole and just watched him for 24 hours straight.
You did. I actually remember when this happened. You texted me a lot of things. I didn't. I supported your fall down the rabbit hole there.
It's amazing. It's amazing. But you guys should check that out as well. Well, Alice, do you have anything else you want to add about the Nahanni Valley or anything else or Halloween or anything before we sign off for today?
No, I am, I'm terrified of everything, but I do like these stories. And this was probably so interesting because this lore really is just not as fantastic as it is in reality, and I hope you've enjoyed kind of digging deeper into what the evidence showed.
Yeah, sorry to be the bearers of bad news. I always hate to throw water on things, but yeah, truth sometimes is not stranger than fiction. Sometimes truth is just much more straightforward. And I think what was probably going on in the Nahanni Valley was a lot of greedy people who thought it was a lot easier to shoot people and take their gold than it was to dig for it. Well, guys, that's all we have for tonight, and that's all we have for this Halloween season. I just want to remind you that vampires and other evil entities cannot enter your house unless you invite them in, which means you need to get rid of your welcome mats. Any lawyer vampire would tell you that is obviously an invitation. So get rid of those and protect yourself. Well, we'll be back next week with a new case, new questions, new answers, less spooky, unfortunately. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Stop yelling so much in ball games. It was just
Was it fun?
Game. I had to. Oh, it was great.
Did you go with anyone or just by yourself?
It was just me.
Nice.
I mean, I met up with some people there, but
How
yeah,
fun.
we got breakfast. I did the whole thing.
Oh, that's great. I have not been to a football game since moving back here. Isn't that terrible?
That is terrible.
Because we have
Go
kids.
one.
We've had kids since we lived here. So, kids. Man, what a damper.
Oh no, kids is holding me back. I always forget to open.
My name is Alice, Brett Alice. Alice. Or Alice. I love it. I don't know if you've noticed, but we like talking.
No.
Never. Okay.
Hopefully my voice holds up the whole time.
I know. If it stops halfway, then I'll just get to continue. It'll be like I've cast a spell on you. See, it goes both ways. That's the twist this time.
Whoa.